Ahoy there. Today on the Red Sea, what's the worst thing that happened after you ignored your body being weird? I played ice hockey from when I was 7 up until 15. Right around the age of 11 I started to notice knee pain. My parents brushed it off as they would not believe that an 11-year-old had knee pain. The pain continued and began to become unbearable just after making the varsity team for my high school at 15. My parents gave in and took me to the doctor. Turns out I had osteochondritis dissecans that got worse every time I skated. After 5 months in leg braces and 3 months of physical therapy, they did not get better and I had to quit the sport I loved. Peed thick blood from a kidney infection due to losing my virginity using spermicide condoms and not peeing soon enough. Worst pain of my life. More people need to know how important it is to pee as soon as you can after sex. It's way too easy to get cystitis, especially if you're a woman. When I was in middle school, I had a spot on my butt that hurt. I showed it to my mom. She said it was a pimple or something and was nothing. So I kept going to school, football practice, etc. About a week later I could not sit down, it hurt so bad. So my lovely mother was going to pop it with a needle. Thank God when she went to touch it, it was hard as a rock and hot, so she stopped. Turned out to be an infected abscess. By far the worst pain of my life. Spent 2 weeks not being able to sit and taking hour-long baths to let it drain. Genuinely do not recommend. Same thing almost killed my gramps just a year or two ago. It kind of lingered for 4-5 days between him detecting it, thinking it was a spider bite or something, and him being in so much pain he needed to go to the hospital. His condition then began worsening at an alarming rate. Antibiotics failed to reduce the swelling fast enough, and soon he was septic, requiring emergency surgical intervention. He is now, and was then, incredibly fit and healthy for his age, around 81 at the time. But that one was scary. The aftermath was easily the worst thing I have ever seen in my life, and I nearly fainted when I saw it the first time, which I'd never done in my 30 years. Those suckers are no joke. Glad to hear you didn't have to go through all that and the associated rehabilitation. You dodged a bullet. I had a pilonidal abscess flare up twice. Did not go to the doctor because I did not have insurance, so I just let it bust open on its own. It's up there with some of the worst pain I have ever dealt with. And I have given birth. Randomly lost 20 pounds and had diarrhea constantly. Ignored 2 months later. I'm a lucky outer tapeworm. Okay, this was told to me by a Vietnamese friend a long time ago. He grew up in Vietnam and lived in a village with a catfish pond. They had a dock to the middle of the pond where there was a cabana type thing with a hole in the floor. He said they would malarkey in the hole to feed the fish. So one day he's malark eating in this hole, and a tapeworm is coming out of his butt, dangling through the hole. Sure enough, a catfish jumps up and grabs it and yanks it out. He said he could feel it being pulled out from his guts and through his bunghole, but it happened so quickly that he just took off running. Had a wisdom tooth removed. Was on a fair amount of ibuprofen for the following week or so. I do not often get headaches, but I had a constant headache around the same time. So when my tooth was feeling better I kept popping the ibuprofen for my headaches. About 2 weeks later I started pooping black. That's weird, I thought, but let it go for about a week. Then I started getting really sick and pale. Uh-oh. My wife convinced me to go to the hospital. Turns out that the ibuprofen has caused a stomach bleed, and I had been internally bleeding into my stomach and digesting it as food. Thus the black poop. The doctor said that I had lost about 40 to 45% of my blood, and if I had stayed home that night I would have likely gone into shock and died of blood loss, blood transfusion and a few weeks of anemia, and I was fine. I had trouble breathing and a nasty cough for a couple of months, but I ignored it as I had no insurance at the time. I ended up blacking out from lack of oxygen at work. It turned out it was pneumonia. Gallstones. Now when I eat a triple cheese pizza, I will feel pain and take almost 3-4 days for the pain to subdue. Get your gallbladder removed as soon as possible. It was the best thing I ever did. Even avoiding food triggers, I'd still end up pissing it off and have an attack that would last like 12 hours. And a majority of my attacks happened when I broke my ankle. So I was eating all the comfort foods my mom made. Cold, not move around. And I was even more depressed because of the whole situation, and my ex made malarkey worse. My mom's lasagna made me feel better for 30 minutes. And then boy, would I pay for it. I had straight up oxycontin from the ankle surgery, and not even one of those would touch the pain. but it would finally knock me out. That and the utter exhaustion from being awake for hours, and from the excruciating pain. I just commented somewhere that a gallbladder attack was the most pain I have been in. Worse than ducking labor. If you can, get that sucker out. Extremely painful cramps and a stabbing pain in my lower abdomen. Just never went to a doctor to get checked out until after I moved to a new city and wanted to discuss medication etc for my PCOS. The only English speaking endocrinologist happened to also be a gynecologist and insisted on a full checkup. Turns out it had endometriosis for years, and I had also developed a large mass on my ovary that required surgery. The doctor could not believe I did not know about any of it and told me if the mass had not been found it could have continued growing, and if it had twisted the ovary and cut off blood supply it could have gone septic and killed me. Had surgery last September. They removed the mass, burnt off the endometriosis, and drilled tiny holes in my ovaries that will supposedly help with some of my health issues. It was stressful finding all this out and having to go through it alone in a foreign country. I barely knew what was happening half the time because they mostly communicated with the school-assigned nurse/translator that accompanied me to appointments. My mom flew out for my operation to be with me, and when they removed the mass and tested for cancer they did not inform me of anything. They told her it came back negative, showed her the mass, and she had to pass that info along to me. The doctors never thought to tell me more than the bare minimum throughout the whole process. They always deferred to whoever seemed to be taking care of me / more authoritative. I was extremely scared and anxious from the first appointment right through to my post-op checkups. If I'd seen a doctor sooner it's very likely that the whole experience would have been better and my quality of life could have been better much sooner too. I cannot believe I just lived in pain like that, thinking it was normal. PS. Sorry about the lack of correct terminology and somewhat basic descriptions. All this took place in China, so I only understand what I have been told by my doctors plus what I have been able to read from translating my surgery notes using a translation app. That's what happened to me. When I was 17 I woke up in the middle of the night. My lower stomach hurt so much I could barely breathe. My boyfriend, who I lived with already, called an ambulance. I got lots of pain meds. One of the nurses basically said I'm a pussy and he would have just stayed at home and taken some painkillers. Early in the morning they took me to a gynecologist and noticed that I had a huge cyst that had wrapped around my ovary and burst. Very soon I got operated. They told me I'm incredibly lucky that the cyst was not infected, spreading infection everywhere. I lost the ovary as the cyst had cut off the blood supply. It was about 12 years ago, so I do not remember many details. But I remember that it was the worst pain I have ever experienced. Good that they found yours early, even though you did not get enough information from them. My doctors told me that taking birth control pills reduces the risk, so I started taking them to be safer in the future. It turns out that shooting pains when shaking someone's hand is my body's code for you have a tumor eating your finger bone. Were they able to save the finger? Yup. I'm still sporting my original 10. High five. Kept having stomach upset after eating pasta or bread. Ignored it for about 2 years. Only eating that stuff occasionally. Went out to celebrate my ACT test score with my boyfriend. Had a nice Italian dinner at my favorite restaurant. Complete with bread, pizza, and pasta. This was the first time after not eating any of that for a while. That night I had a horrible stomach ache and a high fever. Thought nothing of it and went back to work the next day. That is until I saw a bunch of blood and mucus in the toilet after a bout of stomach pains. Turns out all that bread and pasta had caused colitis, an infection of the colon, wound up in the ER, and on some strong antibiotics. Shortly after I got an endoscopy/colonoscopy and discovered I had celiac, which is an autoimmune response to eating gluten. The reaction means my body cannot process it properly and thinks the gluten is a foreign invader. As a response, my body attacks my intestines. It causes pain, bloating, diarrhea and constipation. If I eat even a crumb of bread or a leg of soy sauce, I have pains, bloating and severe constipation which lasts for 4-6 weeks until my intestines are able to heal. Whoops, I thought it was just intolerance, not a full-on allergy. I felt a bit dizzy and spaced out for a few hours at work, which I ignored thinking that I was just a bit hypoglycemic from not eating breakfast and carried on. I then had the worst migraine of my life, where the pain was excruciating. The visual aura covered pretty much the whole of my view. I could not stop vomiting. My left arm went numb and my left leg was pins and needles below the knee, so I could barely stand. My manager was convinced that I was having a stroke so kept pushing me to let her call an ambulance, with me refusing and saying that it was a migraine each time. After about an hour of horrific symptoms, the visual aura started to subside and I began to get normal feeling in my limbs again. So she realized that it was indeed a migraine and arranged for me to get picked up by my BF. I had to have a week off work to recover from it because it was so severe compared to like one day recovery for one of my usual migraines, and am now on the waiting list to see a neurologist. Back when I was around 15 I had gotten a headache. Took a Tylenol and thought nothing of it. Next day rinse and repeat. Headache kept getting worse and worse till I was delirious and throwing up. Turns out it was meningitis. Not a fun 2 weeks. I remember reading a story when I was younger about a girl whose sister had a headache one night and died of meningitis. Still think about it every freaking time I get a headache, which is pretty often. I'm glad you're okay. Had to get a cancerous tumor about the size of a lemur bean cut out of my arm and done on the freaking spot. Ignored what I thought was a cyst for a few years, then finally went to a doctor. Far as they know, I don't have any other cancer in my now, so maybe not a worst thing, but definitely freaked me out. I suffered a transient ischemic attacks. Aged 42. I was working super long hours, getting up at 4:30 am, and my ass not sitting down until 10 PM most nights, and working sat/sun for a short shift. 70-hour week was the norm. Anyways, one night I just nipped the canteen to grab a drink for my way home. Walked down the one step back onto the shop floor in my head. What I can only describe as a giant bubble, like you see in the water coolers when you take a drink. It went like that, a air bubble stemming from my neck right up and through the top of my head. I went really dizzy and had to hold onto the wall for only like 5 seconds at the most. I put it down to me maybe misfooting the one step and upsetting my equilibrium. All seemed okay, if a little groggy/not quite right. Fast forward 1 hour. I'm now at home and I slowly lose all my depth perception. I dropped a cup and could not see it right to pick it back up, and most of my motor skills on my left hand side. Luckily my partner was home, spotted this and took me to hospital as soon as possible. Scary to think in that 1 hour window I was working a skeleton crew on heavy industrial machines and drove myself home. I now work a 44 hour week and all is good. That is the end of this journey, but do not worry, there are many more coming. Like and subscribe for more videos from the Red Sea. Thanks for watching.